Okay, so we talked about extreme consonant systems. What about extreme vowel systems? Well, actually, American English, which we've studied in here, is a fairly extreme vowel system already, just in terms of having a ton of vowels. So there's, depending on which speaker you ask and which area they're from, you'll get anywhere from like 14 to 22 vowels in most varieties of English. And those are, that's a pretty exotic system already. What about on the other end? Well, there's a number of languages in various parts of the world that are analyzed as having three underlying vowels. And so you can see this particular I-U-A system is actually fairly common. Many of these languages are Australian, but not all of them. So for sure, Aleut is not an Australian language. Although Diari and Dyirbal are, and obviously Inuit, well, maybe not obviously, Inuit are the indigenous people of Alaska and parts of northern Canada, and so obviously that's not an Australian language. And you find a number of systems like this. These are so-called corner vowel systems because they have the high front, the high back, and the low middle of the vowel space in them. And then you get various kinds of variation on these systems in other kinds of languages around here, where these include both Amazonian languages. I think Shilya is an African language. I want to say it's I'm never going to remember the name of the family. There's some Australian languages here. There's some American Indian languages, and so on and so forth. So there's nothing family specific about this three vowel pattern. It's attested in a lot of different areas of the world. Here we already run into something a little bit funny, which is that, some of these are listed as having the highest frontist and highest backest vowels. And then some other ones are listed as having slightly less high front and slightly less high back vowels, or just the highest frontist but not the highest backest one. Where are these distinctions actually coming from? Well, it's going to be generally an individual linguist's judgment how they decided to transcribe these particular vowels. It's not clear that these A, B, C, D, and D inventories are actually different from one another. They're all basically having a high front, a high back, and a low, mid, or maybe back vowel in them. So this very well might just be a matter of how individual field linguists decided to write IPA symbols corresponding to these vowels. We've already seen, if we've done our prod assignments this semester, that vowels phonetically are not categories. They're areas of the vowel space that generally you find vowels occurring in any particular language. It's not clear there's really a categorical distinction between this horseshoe vowel and a slightly higher and backer vowel. That might not even be principled. But let's assume that these really are some principled phonetic differences here. What are we going to learn from this fact that languages have three vowels? Maybe humans have an innate grammatical constraint that says, my language must have at least three vowels. Probably not, right? Again, it's just that every language has vowels, and without at least three vowels, it would be pretty hard to come up with words that could be both spoken and heard. More than like a couple hundred words. You need a bunch of sounds in order to be able to create thousands of lexical items, which is what all human languages have in common. So there's probably nothing really grammatical about this at all. It's just like if there were a language with only one vowel, that would be a pretty inefficient system that wouldn't make a lot of sense from an informational perspective. Here's something a little bit more interesting. Every language contrasts at least one front and one back vowel. That's kind of cool. So that didn't necessarily need to be the case. Every language contrasts at least one high and one non-high vowel. That's possibly a substantive universal. And these, again, these are like a little bit more interesting than just saying every language has a front vowel or something like that. But still, actually, this is probably an artifact of the way that these things were written down in this particular typological database. And so one thing, maybe the first thing to understand here before I even get to the problem, is that any kind of a typological database like this, like UPSID or any other kind of wide coverage database like this is trying to give you a capsule summary of the sound system of a language that's where every language is written in the same format, and there's just a certain number of things you can put in there. But as we've seen in this class, the actual grammar of individual languages is extremely tricky and complex. And so there's all sorts of analytical choices that are going to have to be made when you make an inventory like this. Are we talking about surface vowels? Well, probably not, because honestly, every language has an infinite variety of phonetic vowels in its actual speech patterns. So we have to be talking about some level of abstraction when we're listing vowels like this across languages. Maybe it's meant to be vowels in underlying representations? Well, not exactly, because, in terms of features, all of these systems would be the same. They'd have a plus high vowels and a minus high vowel. They'd have a minus back vowel and some plus back vowels. And there's really no room in that for them to be specified for other features that would distinguish these systems. More to the point, in order to get the sort of underlying representations, as we've seen in the last month of class, you have to have a pretty detailed analysis of the phonological system of a language to recover underlying representations. And there's often more than one analysis possible. And when you're trying to annotate 550 languages, you're not going to be able to do that for every single one of them. So these are not really underlying representations either. Instead, these people had to make some kind of an analytic choice when they built this database, and they picked some level of vowel contrast that's not quite at the abstractness of underlying representations, and certainly not at the concreteness of actual surface pronunciations, but it's like kind of somewhere in between. Right? And does that have any status from the standpoint of actual phonological theory or how linguistic cognition and grammar work? Well, we don't really have any idea. You can't solve problems about human cognition by looking at capsule summaries of languages. And so here's an example. UPSID systematically excludes an entire class of languages that are arguably counterexamples to this generalization about contrasting back and front vowels. And in particular, there's a number of languages in the world, mostly in the Caucasian and Austronesian language families, that have only 3 contrastive vowels, just like these ones, except they're so-called vertical vowel systems that have only central vowels at the level of underlying representation. So in general, you'll see languages like Marshallese and Kabardian described as having 3 vowels that come down the center line in the IPA chart. Normally it will be an and vowel, so a high central, mid central, and low central vowel underlyingly. And that would violate all the generalizations about, hey, every language has at least one front vowel and every language has at least one back vowel, and so on and so forth. Why weren't they written down this way in UPSID? Well, I'm not sure. Only the people who put the database together can tell you. But here's my guess. All of these vowels in these languages show allophonic variation in backness, where whether the vowel surfaces as a front or back vowel, whether it's rounded or unrounded, depends entirely on the adjacent consonants. In other words, the frontness or backness of each of these vowels is phonologically predictable from which consonants appear next to them. So in some of these languages, there's a contrast between palatalized and velarized consonants, and that determines that vowels are front adjacent to a palatal consonant, but back adjacent to a velarized consonant, and so on and so forth. It works differently in different languages, and it's quite tricky and complex in a way that can't be captured in UPSID. But the point is, if you actually look at recordings of, for instance, Kabardian, which is one of these so-called vertical vowel systems, you're going to hear a whole bunch of normal full vowels like E and A and O and things like that. But contrastively, underlyingly, phonemically, in Kabardian grammar, there do not appear to be any plus or minus back features in underlying representations of Kabardian vowels. Because when you look at the phonetics, it looks like a normal vowel system, these didn't make it into the 3 vowel languages in UPSID, but it's pretty clear if you look at the details of these languages that they do not conform to this substantive universal that you might otherwise think is real. And what this points to is that it's problematic to even try to derive universals from looking at these broad capsule summary kinds of typological databases. You really need sophisticated and complex analyses of individual languages to really be able to learn anything interesting about linguistic universals. At least that's what I'm trying to convince you of in this lecture.